Merry Meet Annie here. This is the first topic I'm doing in response to requests that were left on my first video back. I'm going to go through them in chronological order. And this one came through, I think when I mention these, not going to mention the name of the person, just in case they don't want their name mentioned in a video, who knows. Some of them, the majority of them are probably comments on that video, excuse me, but I also did have people who sent me messages. This was an interesting one to start off with. A viewer asked me about relationship to the elements, and specifically the possibility of someone being in a place in that relationship to feel they needed to have dominion over the elements. I'm not sure those are her words, they're my words. She had a conversation with someone that she knows, and someone from one of the traditions, who seemed to have that relationship with the elements. And this person who asked this question knows me well, and I have a feeling that part of it came, she knows what my background is, assumed it was similar to her friends, and she was like, I just didn't have, I don't see Annie having that kind of relationship to the elements. I'm guessing that. It's an interesting thing when it comes to relationship with the elements, because you do find it differently, not only circle to circle, person to person, but sometimes even within a circle you might find varying degrees of how folks relate to the elements. I probably relate to the elements the way I do for two reasons. The first thing is, ever since I was a child, I felt at one with them. They were not my enemies. They were not something I felt that needed to be controlled. In fact, when I was very young and going to Christian church with my family, I remember it was one of the questions I asked that basically put me at odds with the church, which was, I don't understand why it even says in the Bible that man's supposed to have power over the elements. I didn't understand why we felt we could control animals and control nature. And there really wasn't an answer for me at the time that satisfied or gave me the reasons why that was a good thing. So I suppose if I had met my first circle and the training had been that that was the relationship you had with them, who knows where I'd be today, because I wouldn't have gone any further, that's for sure. Not with that circle, and probably not with others. I would have had a concern. I have found, and for some reason it seems to be more now than I used to run into it, that there is a relationship with elements with some people and some groups that's almost a, I don't know if it's, I don't want to use the word fear because I don't want to describe what it feels like to those who go this direction, but it definitely is that you can't trust the elements and you have to be in power and in control of them at all times. And it seems to be I'm seeing more of that than I used to, when I thought it would evolve as earth-based traditions into a more of a symbiotic relationship with the elements. So it might be just the people I've come in contact with, and these are folks online, and when I was still doing like discussion groups and things, and also folks in real life. I almost think I have a feeling for where it comes from. You know, when I had my first training, which was rather traditional and formal, we studied the elements as the elementals, the pure and natural, vibrant energy of each of the elements, each having their abilities and their own ways in which they created and destroyed. So you could say good and bad, but really, that's not good and bad. That's existence. That's the circle of life. And the elementals, the energies of the elements as we know them on this plane, and also as they exist as an energy within that around us, is creative and destructive both. Each being so purely what they are that they're going to do what they do. There is no controlling them. So if that's the level at which someone is engaging, whether it's in a group or individually, if they're engaging with that erratic nature of the elements, they're feeling maybe uncomfortable with it. And they feel that their relationship to it has to be the magician with the whip to keep them in line. So that could be what happens if that's the level at which they're engaging. It never happened to me, so I'm talking from my experience, may or may not be yours. It never happened to me because our training was to understand the true nature of each of those elements, and that included their unpredictability, actually included their inability to be controlled also. by man or anything. And then we went on to study the concept of the guardians for the elements. Now, the guardians for the elements, different traditions might have different words for what represents the wisdom of each of the individual elements. So it's not just air that can be comforting, but it can also be the hurricane that takes down everything in your line of sight. It's the wisdom of air that understands the function of air, knows who it is self-aware, and knows who it is in relationship to everything else, the other elements, individually and as a whole. So if you gave the elements a personality that is wise and sentient and tangible, that's where the level of the guardians come in. It might be angels or archangels in some traditions. In my first circle, it was the 4 winds that represented our guardians. And then we were coached to find our own individual guardian, the one who most embodied to us the wisdom of each of the individual elements. And if that layering on is not deep enough, that would be used in circle then, that if I call in a working on an element or more than one element, or even all of them, the guardians are at the portals to my circle. Imagine the opening and closing of a camera lens. I think for some reason that I just need the full throttle experience of fire to effect whatever it is I've set out magically to do. So I'm just in my flaming glory calling upon my brother, fire, thinking that's what I need and I need all I can get. My guardians are at the portal. So in this instance, the one to fire, going, you think you know what you need, but I am the wisdom of this element. I actually know more than you do about this. I will decide what's coming into your circle. I will decide what's coming into your working. I'm taking my lead from you. I'm respecting your request. But I am the safety valve. I am the monitor. I am the wisdom of this element. So, there's an old story. Who knows it's true? It's been in several different books, going back to the earliest contemporary books on Wicca and traditionally, about somebody who in a circle called on the power of fire with no protection and indeed burnt down the house they were doing the ritual in. Okay, we don't know if that's true. Sounds like a beautiful urban myth, but it does illustrate an important point. What was that person's relationship with fire? That fire showed up unfettered and did what fire does. Didn't do anything wrong, really. The wrongness was in the approach to the element. There was a lack of oneness with the element. Oneness when the elements really lead you to believe that I can understand to a certain extent, but I can't truly understand what it's like to be an element. So when you have a level of discomfort, that could mean you feel like you have to have power over that element. But if your goal is to be aligned with all of creation, which mine is, and all of my circles have been, there's this concept of the guardians. They're your wiser self too. You've created them. Unless you're in a group circle and there's been a consensus of what they are, a group mind has created them. So they are symbiotic to you. But they are one with the element they represent. They are the guardians of the watchtowers. They watch over and they control. That layering is the layering of being in relationship to the natural beauty both to create and destroy of each element, and also to understand that at the energetic level there is an intelligence to each of those elements. That's part of my whole spiritual path, the relationship to the intelligence of each of those elements. Now, in the layering of how I work with, how I was taught, how I work with, and then how I teach, this layering of the elementals, pure nature of the elements. The guardians, which is the wisdom. Some traditions call them the grandmothers or the grandfathers of the elements. Some may have animals that represent each of the ones, but the animal is aware and holds all the history and wisdom and potential of the element within it. Well, the third level for me is my gods. And my guardians, who you would think, especially since they're my thought form, or the thought form of the groups I'm in, owe their allegiance to me, don't. In the world as I conceive it, in the layering, the guardians owe allegiance to the gods. Now mine, specifically to the goddess, that's why they are all male, because of the balance of male and female. The way I was taught made sense to me. That's what I've done ever since. When I do a working, first they are loyal to the raw nature of their element. Don't send volcanoes of fire on Annie, who thinks that's what she needs, because I am much wiser than her when it comes to this element, and she's not getting volcano fire. She's getting what I think will serve her purpose. A magic axiom. Give me what I need and no more. And that's what they do. In addition to that, I'm in a working. I want to work with fire. I've asked for basically a volcano's worth of fire to accomplish some particular end. Another magical axiom comes into that. To the best of myself and to all, this is what I declare. That's where our guardians come in again. They are loyal to the gods, who want to see me do well because they have my adoration and they return respect. Only because I've given them proper adoration, by the way, in my view of them. The guardians have a loyalty to whatever's greater, to see that my work is well done. Another magical axiom. To see that I basically don't become the greatest F-up magically. They protected me in times in the Get to Know Your Witches, where I talked about the common ways I made mistakes over my life. Probably will still do the same thing occasionally. They are there to see if we have a proper relationship with them and with our gods. It has a lot to do with respect and that symbiotic relationship you establish. They know I don't want to screw up what I'm doing. That I have best intent when I do it. And because their alignment is to my deities who don't want to see me work out of line and out of place, they will influence what becomes of the work that I do. It's often the explanation why a working ends up playing out differently than you might thought it would have, because somehow you put yourself at the center of the universe and there were other things that needed to be considered that you weren't catching. Whenever I do working, I petition that my gods and my guides see that my work is well done. My gods are not going to show up every one of my circles to personally babysit me. That's not our relationship. I don't even want that relationship with them. I'd like to think they've got better things to do. But my guardians, my guides, are the energies and entities. The important thing is they are entities that I have that relationship with. So, this power over the elements. I'm not the greatest historian, or I read books, but I don't have the retention that scholars in our field do. But we can go back to the need to have dominion over the elements when we read some of the early workings in magic. Like Eliphas Levi. I'm using him as an example of that entire school. Ceremonial magicians who went through a lot of work in a lot of ways to control, to dominate, and to effect change in a very prescribed way. And I think we still feel that influence, even if we don't know that, if we're in circles that act that way, that it came from that. With all respect, a lot of those folks in those early treatises came from a Christian tradition where one of the axioms was man's domination over the earth. Their mindset's different than what most of our contemporary pagan brothers and sisters' mindset would be. So we see that influence. It came from that whole tribe through the Golden Dawn, and most definitely then into various forms and practices of the Wicca. I have seen folks that even were trained similarly to I. They're all about dominion over the elements. However that landed, whatever they studied, whatever their teachers taught them, that's how it felt to them. The majority of people that I have known in a formal tradition and then in the circles I've been in over the years have not had that relationship with the elements. It's been a partnership. It's been a symbiotic relationship. It's been a blending and understanding of energies. Whether there is the layering in of guardians, the wisdom of the four quarters or not, within our communities, I do see varying relationships to these unpredictable, beautifully chaotic energies of creation and destruction. I'm answering on behalf of myself and sharing my relationship with my guardians because they are the reason why I have no need to feel I need to dominate, control, order. They see that my work is well done out of total respect to the element I'm working with and all of the elements individually and combined. And they also see that my work is aligned with my greater good. Why? Because I have declared that I want all of my working to be aligned to my greater good and to the greater good of all. If something I do becomes null and void because, usually inadvertently, or in a moment of hissy fit, I go off on an act of creation that's not to, in the end, my benefit or the greater benefit, when I don't consider the universe and I consider only myself, it's my guardians that are out there, as my grandfathers, who are saying, she's screwing this up. We know she doesn't want to screw up. We've got her back. We've got her back. They've got my back because they have pledged themselves to deity, as I have pledged myself to deity. We both want to see that all work is done well. What's your relationship to the elements? Have you gone through, do you have the same relationship you had originally? Has your relationship matured and shifted and changed? Have you encountered folks who have a relationship with, and I'm not disrespecting those folks, by the way. It's their reality. It's their reality. They have not come to a place with their relationship with the elements that they have that kind of comfort level. It's almost a relationship that has a certain, I don't quite get you, and therefore maybe I've got a little fear of you. And I feel that in some ways I'm better than you, so I can control the situation. And that's a learning process a lot of people work through and come out on the other side differently. But I have seen good, beautiful practitioners who have a very different relationship to the elements than I do. I have to say, even within my own tradition, I saw a lot of different influences on how people related to and interpreted relationship with the chaotic and beautiful aspect of the elements. I'd love to know what your relationship to them is. If you have a video that you've done that you could tell me about, or if you do one, make sure I know about it. I think the importance of this topic is for us all to realize we can't assume that we all have the same kind of relationship with the elements. We're earth-based practitioners, most of us are. Some of us are just downright ceremonial magicians, and maybe it doesn't enter the picture as much. But I'm highly ceremonial. I honor the roots of where my practices came from, and they do go back to people like Eliphas Levi. Absolutely. But they've morphed and they changed not only in how they moved through, especially the Golden Dawn and into traditional Wicca, but they've morphed and changed in my circles and in my practices as my understanding of the elements and their wisdom has deepened. I guess for me the hinge point was there was a moment when, at the same time, I felt the energy, and we'll use fire as an example again, I felt consumed by the energy of fire, literally being devoured by that chaotic beauty of fire, and the other elements have an equivalent. And at the same time, I felt this presence of wisdom that was like, it's okay. And I felt fire become like a heart center of warmth within me. is my first experience that guardians were separate and real and sentient. Oh, I've been told they were. I've been told to create them, to envision them, to come up with my own concept of who they might be. And there was this one time when I felt at the same time the primal energy of the elements and the wisdom of the element as a separate thing. Well, that convinced me in that moment the importance of the guardians and who they were. It sounds like layering upon layering to those who have a much more simplistic practice. I know people who have a very simplistic practice that their relationship to the elements is they are so at one with them, it's not controlling them, it's being so with them that you influence them. There's another way of looking at it. I'd love to know what your take is on this, because we probably have as many different takes as we have people who watch this video. I hope this is interesting to the person who posed the question. I wish you all mirth and reverence. Mary Part.